So much so that if you
Just
take
that, just divisive, you think?
well, if you take it to another level, which is impeachment, then it will further divide the nation. Because, of course, they have the numbers in the House. If there is no legal obstacle, and if the House leadership is so minded, and I believe it can be so minded, it can easily transmit expeditiously the articles of impeachment to the Senate by the plenary voting by a third.
One-third.
Yes, but to transmit it.
Diretso na
But
po
then,
yun.
what will happen? That trial will precede everything else in the country. It will precede inflation, Chinese intrusion, EDCA sites, unpreparedness for natural disasters, etc. It's going to take so much precedence that the country will be paralyzed. And if you paralyze the legislature, and then you basically paralyze a third of the government machinery.
So are you saying it's about timing?
It's not about just timing. It is about the effect on the body politic. It could leave a scar that may not heal well into the next decade. So that is the fear here, because if you notice, some of the scars that were left by the impeachment of President Estrada have not yet healed. They're still there. The effect on the national psyche will be well nigh incapable of being healed.
The Vice President, during today's press conference, I believe said that she's getting her lawyers ready, or her lawyers are actually ready. Even she said, I think last year when she heard about a possible impeachment complaint from Congresswoman Franz Castro, has she reached out to you? Are you going to be a part of her legal team?
I don't know yet. I do not know the Vice President. I have not met her. We've met during the campaign because I campaigned for him. But VP, I've never met her actually.
I see. Okay, so the Vice President not showing up again dito po sa subpoena na inisyu ng NBI for the hearing that they want to conduct on supposedly grave threats and possible anti-terror law. Grounds for the anti-terror law. I know. So I want to discuss that with you first. Ano ho ba yung implication when you don't show up during a hearing wherein you have been issued a subpoena, no matter who you are?
There should be no legal implications because under our Constitution, when there is a custodial investigation, and a custodial investigation starts when an inquiry ceases to be a general investigation into the commission of a crime and begins to focus on a particular suspect, then all the so-called Miranda rights come into play. The right to remain silent, the right against self-incrimination, the right to confront witnesses, and she is merely exercising these constitutional rights. But I must concede that the optics are not so good because her enemies are milking it for all it's worth. They're saying that she has something to hide, etc. But from a purely legal standpoint, from a purely constitutional point of view, she's perfectly within her rights.
That's okay. So kahit na po sino sa atin, isabpina ng NBI at hindi po tayo magpakita, you're saying that's okay?
Yes, that is okay. Because you would only be exercising your constitutional rights. The NBI does not investigate crimes in the same manner that the National Prosecution Service does, in the sense that they can make no determination of whether or not there is probable cause to file a case in court.
Yeah, but they will recommend,
yes,
diba, the filing of cases, for example, with the panel of prosecutors, right?
Yes, but then the panel of prosecutors will still have to investigate anew. They cannot rely on the findings of the NBI. Yes, definitely. You cannot skip preliminary investigation without running afoul of the constitutional precepts of due process.
So Vice President Sara was saying hindi na raw, or ayaw niya pumunta because she doesn't feel like it's going to be a fair investigation. You have the NBI saying, time and time again, you know, we want to look into possible grave threats or problems with the anti-terror law. And let me add, attorney, sinasabi nila na gusto namin imbestigahan yung sinasabi ni VP Sara na there are threats to her life. So wouldn't it have been prudent or fair or right for the Vice President also to give the NBI that leisure, that luxury to be able to investigate the threats that the Vice President is claiming on her life?
The NBI will always be free to investigate. Now, whether or not the person subject of investigation wants to cooperate or not, she's also within her rights. But of course, I would not want to second guess the Vice President. Because sometimes, not all the time, I also advise my clients who are being investigated by the NBI and not to show up, and instead it's the lawyer who shows up and tries to answer the questions and invoke the constitutional rights of the client. So I would not want to substitute my judgment for that of the Vice President. Maybe her lawyers have a different a game plan, so I would not know. But of course, the NBI should feel free to continue with its investigation without the Vice President.
Bakit ho kayo natawa nung pinag-usapan po natin yung grave threat at the anti-terror law?
Natawa ako kasi she was saying, I mean, the Vice President was saying that this is out of the Arnie Teves playbook, and I'm very familiar with that playbook because they did the same thing with us. First, they pulled out his security like they did with VP Sara. Then they began to demonize her, just the same as they did with Congressman Teves. Now they're applying the Anti-Terror Act, which is ridiculous because if you look at the mens legislatores, meaning the mind of the legislators as reflected in the legislative debates when they were enacting the Anti-Terrorism Act, it was not meant to apply to common crimes. For instance, even assuming without conceding that Mr. Teves committed those acts, those are not per se acts of terrorism.
And what are they?
They're common crimes of murder, etc. Of course, there are also enumerations of certain crimes in the Anti-Terror Act, but they must be read in the larger context of an orchestrated plan to terrorize, to sow confusion, fear, chaos among the population. A single act, even if there are many victims, a single act of murder does not achieve that.
But in the case of former Congressman Arnie Teves, it's not a single act of murder, hindi ho ba?
Well, it's an isolated act, meaning to say it's one act. Well, under criminal law, there is such a thing as one act resulting in many victims. Yes.
Okay.
But if it's not a series of acts, you can see that after that particular alleged act of assassination, there were no more assassinations in Negros Oriental. That cannot fall under the rubric of terrorism because that is for a different case. You must remember that the Anti-Terrorism Act was enacted as a response to the Marawi siege. That is the kind of terrorism that it seeks to prevent in the future.
In fact, when we were talking about this with the previous guest, ang iniisip po kasi kapag anti-terror law, hindi daw ibig sabihin dapat terorista ka. I think it was Undersecretary Andres who may have said that to me, na it doesn't necessarily mean na terorista ka. So before we go to Arnie Teves again, I'm gonna go to him in a bit. How does this apply? Possibly lang naman po, possibly apply to VP Sara because of that press conference, that grave threat na pag ako mamatay, may kinausap na ako, patayin si BBM, si Lisa Araneta Marcos, at si House Speaker. Is there anything in the anti-terrorism law that could constitute or find her guilty or mapasok po siya dun sa crime ng pasok sa anti-terror law? Meron ho ba kaya kahit isa doon?
Well, first of all, that statement by Undersecretary Andres is so illogical. It's like saying that when you are charged under the Anti-Money Laundering Act, you're not money laundering. Or if you are charged under the Dangerous Drugs Act, you do not peddle in drugs. That's ridiculous. You cannot be charged under these acts, especially these specific laws targeted towards a particular narrow class of crimes. It's like saying if you're charged for murder, you're not a murderer. You can see how illogical that statement is. At any rate, what VP Sara was saying, and I'm not siding with her because I'm not representing her in any shape, manner, or form. These are preparatory acts, and every first-year law student knows that preparatory acts are not punishable. For instance,
What are preparatory acts?
well, for instance, I plan to murder, say, Congressman Dan Fernandez. And so I take out my gun, I load my bullets, I put it in a holster, put the holster in my waistband, go out looking for him. But when I see him,
You don't do
I
anything.
don't do it. So unless my gun has no license and I'm carrying it illegally outside my residence, then I cannot be charged of any crime.
I see. That's preparatory.
Yes.
Parang nag-prepare ka naghanda ka to do
Yes.
something pero hindi mo kinonsummate, hindi natuloy.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Halimbawa, gusto kitang ligawan, nahihiya naman ako. Natorpe ako, wala naman akong nasabi.
So wala yun.
Wala yun.
Opo,
Hindi kita
okay.
magiging girlfriend.
Oo, hindi po. So, bakit naman po si Dan sa naisip ninyo?
It's
Anyway.
just the top of my head. I like the way he mangles the English language.
Okay. So, with that, let's go to former Congressman Arnie Teves. So, sa kanya naman po, parang sabi mo nga, demonize siya.
Yes.
When you say that he was demonized, I mean, how do you reconcile that with the witnesses, the number of witnesses that have given their testimony on how meron pong environment of fear doon po sa lugar kung saan po namuno si Congressman Arnie Teves.
You know what? That's the funny thing about it, Pinky. All these witnesses that they paraded before media, after they have had the opportunity to seek counsel of their own choice, because when they were taken into custody, they were given lawyers chosen by the NBI. When they were given counsels of their own choice, they all recanted. And as I was saying, under normal circumstances, when your witness recants during preliminary investigation, the case is dismissed. But in this case, since the president himself has intimated that he thinks that Congressman Teves is guilty, then, of course, under the doctrine of qualified political agency, the Secretary of Justice can do no less than find probable cause. And that is something that is not being reported by media, this recantation. So, right now,
Did
the
they
recantation
all
stands.
recant?
Yes, they did.
Lahat po?
Yes, in fact, some of those who are co-accused of other crimes have been granted bail because the courts have found that evidence of guilt is not strong. And these are matters that are not reported to media. That's why I'm saying they're being demonized. All adverse news are being given far and wide publicity, but those favorable to my client are being suppressed for some in one way or another, or for some reason or another.
So, he went to Timor-Leste. Ano ba yung sinasabi sa flight is an admission of guilt? Tama ho ba yun?
Flight is that is a general statement that cannot overturn a constitutional presumption of innocence.
Okay, fair enough. But he left because...
He left. No, he did not leave, actually. That is another
No, first he
false
went to
news.
the United States,
Yes,
right?
that was
He had,
before. That was
okay.
before the alleged crime was committed. He was already out of the country. Therefore, technically, he did not flee. When you flee, there is a warrant of arrest against you, and then
Umalis ka.
yes, and then you hide, you conceal yourself to avoid being arrested under the authority of that warrant. So technically, he did not flee. He was already out of the country and fearing for his life based on the series of events that transpired, even as far back as December 2022, he chose the prudent path of being away from the country to prevent danger to life and limb.
Why did he choose Timor-Leste?
I have no idea, probably because it has no extradition treaty with the Philippines.
Yes. And what else? What could be the other reasons, sir?
Well, any country is as good as any other if you're just trying to safeguard yourself. But as you see, we are going through the legal process in Timor-Leste. And so far, we have complied with this legal process.
Am I correct in saying, though, that you've lost twice in the Court of Appeals? They've denied Arnie Teves' request to remain in Timor-Leste?
Another fake news,
Okay.
because in the first instance, we lost our fight against extradition. However, upon appeal to the plenary, that judgment was overturned because it was null and void for lack of due process. And so there
What was the lack of due process there? Was it the vote? Was there something about the vote na hindi po, there wasn't enough votes?
It was only heard by one justice.
Okay.
And there were 3 justices who signed, meaning to say, two of those who signed were not witness to the entire proceedings. And as Daniel Webster says, due process means that the law must hear before it condemns. So in this case, they did not hear the witnesses.
Right.
They only knew about the case through the transcripts. So that
And
is
that's not
anathema.
enough, huh?
Yeah, that's
That's not
anathema
enough. Okay.
to due process.
Okay. So, first time, you lost, but there was an appeal, and it was overturned.
Yes.
Okay.
So the extradition request, the judgment granting the extradition request of the Philippines was nullified.
Was nullified. But there was a second one.
Yes.
And this is where your client lost.
Yes, we lost again,
Okay.
but this is still subject to another appeal to the plenary of the Court of Appeals.
And what is the plenary? How many justices are there in the plenary?
According to the rules, there are 6 justices.
6. Okay.
3 justices heard the second extradition hearing. 2 voted in favor, 1 voted against. Because, of course, Timor-Leste is a very young country. And while there is a provision for a Supreme Court under its constitution, the Supreme Court, as a Supreme Court, has not yet been
Yeah.
constituted up to this date.
Kaya hanggang Court of Appeals pa lang
Court of
sila.
Appeals, the
Sa ngayon.
plenary consists of 6 justices. That is where
Yun na yun.
you hold an appeal.
I see. So that their Court of Appeals only has 6 justices pala
Yes.
for now. Okay. Very quickly though, I wanted to discuss the case of Cassie Ong or
Yes, poor
Cassandra
Cassie Ong.
So she's been moved to the Women's Correctional in Mandaluyong since September 25, if I'm not
Yes.
mistaken. Just to be clear, because maybe marami na rin pong nakalimot doon sa progress nung kanyang, wala naman siyang kaso eh.
None
Yung
whatsoever.
kanyang testimonya sa Quadcom, sir. So, number 1, wala pa ho siyang kaso.
Up to now, wala pa po.
Okay. Why is she still detained at the Women's Correctional? It's been almost 3 months.
Because after the first detention order,
Similarly to Attorney Zulaika Lopez.
Yes.
Where she was moved from the House of Representatives Detention Center to the VMMC, to St. Luke's, and then back to VMMC, where medyo nagkaroon po siya supposedly ng trauma. Ano po? What is really the power of Congress, or where can they detain resource persons that they deem or call out in contempt because of maybe they're lying to the eyes of the lawmakers?
it's supposed to be in the custody of the Senate or the House, as the case may be. That is why both the Senate and the House have their own respective detention facilities.
Okay.
The Correctional Institute for Women is not only an executive facility, it is a facility for convicted felons. And therefore, the legislature...
Ibig sabihin na sentensyahan ka na.
Yes.
Oo.
The legislature has no business telling the executive what to do under the doctrine of separation
And
of powers.
what do you intend to do about that?
Well, we are trying to see whether there is some shred of humanity left in the Quadcom that they will release her during the holidays, as the Senate did with Arvin Balag. If you recall that case of the murder of Atio Castillo, Arvin Balag was one of those implicated as a member of the fraternity, and he was detained on contempt charges also, yet they released him sometime in December for humanitarian reasons.
Attorney, I know that there is going to be, if I'm not mistaken, a resumption of the Quadcom hearing tomorrow. That is going to be Thursday. Number one, do you still attend?
We attend, we render legal assistance
Okay.
to the best of our abilities, notwithstanding the harassment tactics of the chairs of
Will Cassie Ong be attending tomorrow?
If she is subpoenaed, of course, we will attend. We will respect the Quadcom. We respect the Quadcom, although we do not respect many of the members thereof.
Okay, but you don't know if she was being summoned.
We should know pretty
Bukas na
soon.
po ito eh. My understanding is the continuation of the Quadcom is tomorrow.
We have not received any subpoena as of this time.
Okay, but do you plan to appeal, make a formal appeal to the lawmakers to maybe release her from the correctional in Mandaluyong?
We
Or
will
do
do
you plan
so.
to file a case before the Supreme Court or question this before the Supreme Court?
We're still willing to give the Quadcom the benefit of the doubt that they have not turned entirely into monsters, and perhaps there is some little shred of humanity inside them, that they know these are going to be the holidays, that they are torturing a 24-year-old female whose link to the Pogos, while existing, may be tenuous and has not been proven, not even during preliminary investigation. So, the law should be compassionate That is what we are counting on, the spirit of the season. But failing in that, then we will have to take the matter to somewhere else where we can try to secure the appropriate remedy.
So right now, you have no plans to run to the Supreme Court or question this before the Supreme Court?
That is always an option, but we are still counting on the better nature of these people, assuming that they have that kind of nature within them.
Just on a last note, I do recall reading that you had mentioned that she's having some problems.
Yes, and who wouldn't?
I mean,
Under the circumstances.
medyo nahihirapan po siya mentally.
Yes, definitely. Can you imagine, she's 24 years old, she's at the prime of her life. She has not been even charged of any crime. Her detention was railroaded, she was repatriated, she left the country legally, by the way. She was repatriated, she was arrested illegally by the NBI without charges being filed. That is a crime in itself, and now she's being denied her liberty just because of the whims and caprices of these people, including that crazy Paduano.
But if you have, do you not have, will you not be able to secure a copy of these documents that they're asking for?
Actually, under the doctrine of due process, if you cite someone in contempt, you have the burden of proof of showing that she has the document and she refuses to show them. It is not up to us to comply if we find it legally or physically impossible to comply, either on matters of right to remain silent or right against self-incrimination, or the fact that we do not have these documents.
Does she have the documents?
She does not.
She does not.
Because
not even in the office.
You know, all that the Quadcom should do is ask for copies from those who raided. They are there, but they refuse to do so because they want her detained for some reason that only they know.
Attorney Ferdy Topacio, sir, thank you so much for your time.
It's
Again,
always
it's
a
also good
pleasure.
to see you. Thank you, sir. And that's On Point. Join us again.